Welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you here. And I'm excited to learn a little bit about your background because you are definitely in a space and in roles where there are few women and very male dominated, but you've figured out how to be successful and lead a very, fulfilling and successful career. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you found your way into, just financial world and, what led you on that journey and how did you land in the role that you are in right now?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be a part of the podcast. I guess I'll just start with a belief that I have, and that is feedback is a gift.
Yes.
Life is anything but linear, and we're constantly getting feedback throughout life on what's working and what's not. What you'll see throughout my journey is I pay really close attention to all forms of feedback, how my body is reacting, friends, family, strangers, to things that are happening at work. They all help me grow as a person. So my simple story is I'm a girl from New Jersey. I had a dream of playing Division I field hockey
Wow.
in college that led me to my alma mater, which is Rutgers University, where I met my best friend, who's my husband today. And I built unbelievable friendships. But in the summer of my junior year in college, I had an internship. And that really opened me up to the world of asset management. And from that moment, I had this aspiration to become a fundamental equity investor. Coincidentally, shortly after I graduated, my family moved up to Boston, and I decided that was where I needed to go. So I followed them to Boston, which is where I eventually got my start in the financial services business and led me to Wellington. But there are a couple of things that are interesting. I thought I had an idea of what it was I wanted to do. I thought that's what I was doing when I was in that summer internship when I was a junior in college. And where I ended up, where I started, was really far away from where I ultimately wanted to be. And that's where I spent a fair bit of time really making sure that I was in an organization that was going to open up opportunities for me that would help me grow and develop. So I didn't start where I wanted to, but it was a great place for me to start and really put me on my path to where I am today. I'll add just a couple of other points if you'll allow me.
Yes.
I'm the youngest of three girls. And so that really taught me the importance of always striving for more. My parents always worked more than one job. And so that taught me the importance of having a really strong work ethic. I went to a boarding school in Southern Connecticut, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, but that taught me how to be comfortable being different. And I grew up playing team sports, and that really shared with me the fact that the reality is sometimes you can work hard, but you don't always win. And that it's really hard for you to do everything on your own, that there's a team around you to help you be successful.
Right. That's fantastic. And I love your story where you talked about, where you ultimately wanted to be, the first job you had wasn't quite it. But what's important is that you had you said you had a path, you had the clarity of where you wanted to be. So you had that North Star. And I think, what I hear and what I'm deducing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you had the opportunity. So you went to this organization. It wasn't quite the role that you wanted, but you knew that would lead you in that direction, right?
Yes.
And so yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's so important. Clarity is so important because I think sometimes, a lot of the women that I coach and mentor, they don't really put in that think time around what is it that what is that North Star? And then they get tapped on the shoulder like, oh, you should do this role. You should do that role. You should go here. You should go there. And they kind of follow along, but they don't have that initial North Star. So then when they look up one day, they're like, how did I end up here? It's not where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
I think that is super important. So could you talk a little bit about, like you said, originally you wanted to go and play hockey, and then you had this internship and it opened your eyes to some opportunities in another world. And then you kind of had your mark on where you wanted to land. Um, can you tell me a little bit about how you went digging a little deeper for that clarity on the career path and understanding maybe your strengths and the purpose, what it is that you enjoyed and why it led you that way?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start by saying that, clarity comes over time.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment, it felt about as clear as mud.
Right.
And it's hard to let go of something that you feel so strongly about. And
Mm-hmm.
the first thing for me was really about letting go.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for me to do that, I had to work for an organization, try to identify an organization that was philosophically aligned with me. And so what do I
Yes.
mean by that? I wanted to work with people that were going to help me grow, that were going to help me learn, that were going to give me lots of opportunities, because I realized that this was really my first big lesson, that I thought I knew what I wanted to do. And when I got into this job, I really realized that I want to be a fundamental equity investor. And I worked for the largest index fund in the world. And so that contradiction was so clear to me. And the realization was, I don't know it all. And so I wanted to take a step back. I wanted to lean on the organization, be in a part of the organization that was a feeder for the rest of the firm,
Mm-hmm.
and trust that if I worked hard, if I was listening and I was learning, that I would be able to find different opportunities that would help me eventually get to my role.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'd start with that by really letting go in those early days. It enabled me to see more clearly
Mm-hmm.
through the eyes of others who had more experience what a path could look like. Um,
Right.
the other thing I'll just add is when I came to Wellington, there was a point at time in my career where I had the opportunity to spend 2 years in London on an expat assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another really pivotal moment for me, because that's where I first thought that, you know what, I might actually want to go into leadership. I might
Mm-hmm.
want to go into management. And it
Mm.
wasn't until that point in time where I saw myself in a different role, potentially saw myself in a different role. So when I ended up coming back to Boston from that London expat assignment, again, these doors were opened up to me because I had opened up my thinking around what the opportunities were.
Mm. I think that is such an important point that you made in terms of, in hindsight, you realize that the opportunity in London was a pivotal role. But in that moment, there's a level of uncertainty, there's a level of fear of like, I'm going to leave where I'm comfortable. I'm going to leave my home, my, a family. And I'm going to go to London and do this opportunity. What helped you did you have any fears, any uncertainty, and what helped you kind of push through that and say yes and just take the opportunity?
Well, the irony of this is that I absolutely wanted to go to London. It had been a dream of mine for so long, and when the opportunity presented itself, I would argue that it wasn't the right time for my family. And so my daughter was just entering high school. And so it was a really important time for her. So we had, as a family, a decision that we needed to make as to whether or not and how we were going to approach that. But I guess this idea of really not giving up on your dreams was kept playing over and over in my head. And I didn't think about the challenges that I would be presented with, because I was so excited just about the opportunity that when I
Right.
ended up getting to London, I'd been visiting there for over a decade. I would have said to you before I went that London felt like home. But when I got there and I was living there, it's a little bit embarrassing, but I have to admit that I experienced a little bit of culture shock. There are some things that are
Yes.
slightly different, that, again, this idea of opening yourself up to other people's perspectives I had to learn that in the first 6 months to really then appreciate and embrace that experience.
Mm. That's so insightful in terms of, I think people, they, I guess, underestimate the amount of culture shock that you can experience. And because you're like, oh, well, this is a country where they speak English, we can understand one another, whatever it is. But you get there and you realize that there are subtle nuances that are significant, right? Significant in the way that they do business, or that can impact. Can you talk a little bit about, like, and sometimes when those things happen, it's, we do something where is embarrassing, or we stick our foot in our mouth, or we make some sort of mistake, or fall flat on our face, right? Can you talk a little bit about, like, when you did have kind of those moments of like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, or what you would consider a failure or a setback? How did you overcome that? How did you handle that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really challenging and tricky topic because
Mm-hmm.
I start from the position of really trying to, now I can say this after many decades of experience, but I'm really trying to reframe
Mm-hmm.
how I define failure.
Mm.
And I think the first step for me is reframing it, because that word failure in and of itself, it feels so heavy. It takes on a different
Mm-hmm.
life of its own.
Has a negative connotation that we immediately put to it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's like lack of success. Like,
Uh-huh.
okay, like, and so and then if you personalize it, like I did something, I put my foot in my mouth, like then you
Mm-hmm.
personalize it, it gets even heavier. So how do I think about overcoming this? I do try to really think about. I try to take things in small bites.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of self-reflection. Self-reflection is both a blessing and a curse, because you can always find ways that you could say something better or differently.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I really try to keep everything in context and perspective. And so if I've offended somebody, I want to apologize. I want people to know what my intention is. And if it's just a life lesson for me, then I really want to make sure that I'm being fair to myself,
Right.
and not expecting some form of perfection when being perfectly imperfect is okay sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that, perfectly imperfect. Because we can get lost in the perfectionism, right? Every time we're trying to perfect something, ironically, what people don't realize is that we tend to procrastinate when we're trying to make something perfect, right? Or we hold out until we think it's like absolutely like perfect. And other people see it as like, it took you too long, you couldn't decide, whatever that was. So I love that you're embracing perfectly perfect. And I agree with you 100% that we have to reframe the way that we associate failure with negativity. So I like to say, to me, failure is learning. It's a teachable moment, right?
Yes.
And that you can learn lessons from it. You
Well,
said something. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's a great point, and that goes back to the first thing we were talking about, where feedback is a gift,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
failure is a form of feedback, and I want to approach it from an embracing perspective,
Mm-hmm.
rather than it's a punishment or you've done something wrong.
And we were going to that same point. You'd mentioned earlier how feedback is a gift. And feedback is something also that a lot of the women, and we coach and mentor, cringe when they hear the word feedback, but not realizing that part of the reason we get held back, or that we fall back, is because we're not getting that candid feedback in order to grow. And so what I challenge women all the time is that, we ask for feedback and then we leave it at face value when someone says, oh no, great job, you did a great job, keep doing what you're doing. And we leave it at that, but we're not given anything to build upon, no constructive feedback to build upon. So what would you say about constantly seeking out feedback? And I loved what you said earlier, how feedback isn't just like oral feedback coming from a person, but you're like, I listen to the feedback my body's giving me, I'm watching other people's reactions. Talk about feedback, the way that you've learned to leverage feedback, and how you ask for feedback when you're not getting it.
Yeah. So I am a very direct person. It's been a part of my DNA, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
from the earliest of days that I can remember. And so for me, there was this idea of I owe it to you to be direct about what I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling. And what I
Mm,
didn't realize in those early days, when you're talking to a friend about how you've experienced something and how it impacted you, sometimes people can't handle feedback as directly as I was
right.
able and willing to give it. So the first thing for me is just really appreciating that there are many differences in how people receive and give feedback, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to try to understand those nuances in everybody that I would say is in your circle of trust, that you want as a confidant to really help you get better every day. So that was sort of lesson number one for me. So being direct for me and giving feedback wasn't hard, but what was hard is seeing people not be able to appreciate it and embrace it because of how I was delivering it. So
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to modulate my approach there. But
Mm-hmm.
then to the point that you asked, as you grow in an organization, the further up you get, the less feedback you're going to receive.
Mm,
And so just because it's not landing on your desk doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And you do
right.
have to go out and you do have to fish for it. And so I have found I have a small circle of truth tellers. And
Mm,
these are people that I rely heavily on to be as candid and open and honest with what's working and what's not working.
mm-hmm.
And that circle evolves. It's not a static group, and it
Mm-hmm.
evolves based upon what are the things that I'm experiencing and going through, whether it's career or personal, to
Mm-hmm.
really make sure that I'm holding myself accountable to this idea of constantly growing and developing, but asking a group of people you trust, people
Mm-hmm.
that you know whose intentions are good, is the most comfortable place I am in asking for feedback.
Mm. I love that. And I love that you said truth tellers, because I tell people, like, it's great to have a, network or mentors or people who are surrounding you that are lifting you up and patting you on the back and cheering you along. But it's so important to embrace the truth tellers. And sometimes the truth tellers are the people that maybe you don't like so much because they are the truth tellers, but they're the ones you're going to grow from the most. I
Yeah.
think that is so, so important that you shared that. Which leads me to the question. You said you had a small circle of truth tellers, and so thinking about that broader community that helps you learn and that you lean on to help maybe get things done for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about the power of community and how you ask or how you enlist your community to help you in your career? Because what I have found is that many women they have lots of networks, lots of connections. They may leverage them for some personal things, but they aren't really leveraging their community in their career, like asking for help building a competency or whatever it may be. Can you talk a little bit about community and how you leverage it? Because it seems like you're doing it with, making sure you're getting that candid feedback and the truth tellers. How do you develop that network or that circle of people around you?
Yeah, well, I'd say I think that there's a couple of dimensions I think are important to touch on. The first I would say is in any relationship, it's really important that it's a two-way street,
Mm-hmm.
and they take time to build. And the
Right.
only way that you can build strong relationships is by being authentic and being willing to be vulnerable with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember when I first started at Wellington, I was a global industry analyst. I was responsible for investing in property casualty insurance,
Mm-hmm.
equity stocks. When I was given the opportunity to manage money on our clients' behalf, I remember before I had that opportunity, I spent a lot of time with a peer of mine on the finance team, and just asking her for I'd ask her a ton of questions, and then I'd ask her to ask me a lot of questions. She didn't have overlap with what I did. I mean, she was in financials, but she didn't know all the nuances of insurance. But having somebody with an unbiased perspective that was outside of what I was doing, provide that kind of context, really helped me get better.
Yes.
And so I guess the point of that is, you do have to find people that are willing to devote the time to a relationship. And it is, for me, I've found asking for help, not being afraid to just ask for help,
Yes.
is the first and really important step, because most people do want to help. And I grew tremendously through that experience. And that taught me it's okay to ask for help.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that was so important and powerful that you said that asking for help doesn't mean that you're any less smarter or any less, capable of doing the job. It's actually smarter because you're going to get it done faster, rather than spinning your wheels trying to figuring it out on your own. And so I think that's really, really important. And what I've deduced from you sharing is that you do leverage your network, but I loved what you said is that circle doesn't stay the same, that you're intentional on developing relationships that are, the mentors and the people who got you here aren't the ones who are going to get you there. So really being intentional on who it is in that circle. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because feedback I get sometimes when I am mentoring or coaching, these younger women, they're like, there's a little bit of this, for lack of a better term, icky factor, that I'm being intentional on developing a relationship for this purpose. And I tell them that's the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, it doesn't mean it has to be a shallow relationship, but talk a little bit about how you do that, because you've been very successful, it sounds, in that regard. Tell me, how does that land on you? How does that resonate, that comment?
Yeah, it's funny because I do think that, we try to set up mentor relationships to help people when they're new to our firm, and sometimes those work and sometimes they don't. But to your point, there's an intention behind it. If we want somebody to learn how to interact more with the portfolio managers at the firm, then we want them to have a specific person to help them with that perspective. So there is an intentional element to mentorships. What I have found over time is when I've been assigned mentors, some of them have worked and some of them haven't. What I try to do when I'm interacting with people, whether it's at work or in my personal life, it's really trying to understand where there is commonality. And once you find a common something that is similar between us, it does change the nature of the relationship. And so for me, I do look for common points of interest, common experiences, as a way to form and build different relationships that I don't have clarity on where they're going to end, or if these individuals will be in my circle of truth tellers. But what I'm certain of is that I'm building deep and strong relationships.
That's important. And I think what I've also heard from you is that this is something you've continuously done throughout your career. And I find it fascinating that, you've done an excellent job where it sounds like you are constantly also seeking out mentors, even though you are super seasoned and successful. You're always seeking out that next level person that's going to help you, which I think is so important, because research has shown, and even through the women that, we work with, once we get to a certain point and we start mentoring other people, a lot of the times we forget to continue getting mentored ourselves. So can you talk a little bit about that, of, how it's successful you've been because you keep kind of keeping that circle fresh?
So I think it's really important that that you not think about, this is something that I struggled with, because I didn't want people to think that I was building these relationships for for a purpose that can often be termed as being political.
Yes.
What I was doing, what I was intending to do was really focused not on being political, but on making sure that I was continuing to learn and grow and benefit from those that have experience around me, so I could help the firm and others around me get better as well. And importantly, give it back, right? So my circle continues to grow, and there are different people in the circle that bring something different to me. For like, I've got a really good friend who helps me think about taking risk. I've got a really good friend who helps me think about the pros and cons of making a decision. And again, my friendships aren't deliberate for those purposes, but what I found is I'm leveraging what they're strong at to help me get better at that as well.
I love that. I love where you have done enough kind of self-introspection to know what your strengths are. And then you're leveraging others in the places that maybe your strength or, isn't as developed or honed in. So you're really tapping them for those. I think that is phenomenal. And I think it's phenomenal in that you are realizing you don't have to do it all alone, and that you're better in getting that, insight from somebody else, and you get it done faster, and you end up coming out with better solutions. Now, can I ask, one question, because you do work in a very male dominated industry. And a lot of the times we have individuals who fall into this trap of that the only people who can mentor them or only people who can coach them are people who look like them. So looking for other female mentors or whatnot. So can you just share, like, in your career, have all of your mentors been female only, or have they run the gamut?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. They have run the gamut. And I do feel fortunate in that regard. I have had some really great male mentorships that have helped me. There's one in particular. I remember as an analyst, I do a lot of deep dive analysis and analytical work on companies. And this particular individual had a particular style, which was more growth than what I was used to experiencing covering insurance. And through that mentorship, they really helped me broaden the types of companies that I was able to look at. That's a different kind of mentorship. So I think you can learn from everybody. There's something that we can learn from everybody. So I have all kinds of mentorship types of relationships. And I think that that's key. You touched on this before. There's something that we can learn from everybody, and all of these different and diverse perspectives make us better.
Absolutely. I could talk to you forever. Thank you so much. So I want to be respectful of time, so we'll have to close out the conversation, but one of my favorite part of the interview is the lightning round questions, because I feel they reveal some things about people that we may not have gleaned otherwise throughout the conversation. So in my first question, I want to ask you, what book has really greatly influenced you?
So there's so many great books out there. And the one that's the most recent is a book called Turn the Ship Around.
I love it. I've heard of that. It was on my short list. I get this list from a book club, and that's definitely one of my lists to read. What is your favorite inspiring quote or saying?
Dance like no one's watching.
I love that one. I do that quite a bit. I actually dance when no one's watching, and dance like you wouldn't want to see. So what is one word or moniker that you would use to describe yourself?
So I have to say that it's hard to share a word like this about yourself. So I did ask my family for their perspective, and fierce is the word that was an agreement of what would describe me the best.
I love it. And sometimes, you know what, the best monikers or the best nicknames or whatever people refer you are for those around you, because we have our own blind spot. and we would call ourselves, describe ourselves in another way. And then somebody else says, oh, no, 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 you are fierce. So phenomenal. I love it. Live it, own it, embrace it. What is one change, one habit, behavior, action that you implemented at some point in your life that made your life better?
I would say running, and in particular, running with my daughter.
Uh-huh.
And if I can say two things, so that
Yeah.
working out and carving out time for myself was critically important. And the second is making sure I surround myself with the right people.
That's so important, because it is actually true that I truly believe it, where you are the kind of the average of the 5 people you surround yourself by. So you have to be intentional. I remember hearing my mom say similar sayings, and I'm like, whatever. And she's like, don't, you have to pay attention to the crowd that you're hanging out with. And I'm like, you are so right. I totally believe her now. And finally, my favorite. So let's say that Fierce Mary is about to walk out on stage. There's thousands of people out in the audience. What is that power song that would be playing as you step foot on that stage?
So it's Fly from the Inside by Shinedown.
Oh, I love it. I'm so excited to pull all of these amazing songs from our guests that we're going to pull together like a quarterly power list of songs. And that is going to definitely be on the top of the list. So thank you so much, Mary, for your time. Loved having you here to share your pearls of wisdom. And I want to ask, because I know that after every episode, we have somebody reaching out who will always say, I loved Mary's story, resonated so much. How do I stay in contact, or how do I follow her? So what's the best way for someone to get in contact with you if they so chose to?
Sure. So I am on LinkedIn. So Mary Pryshlak. I'm on LinkedIn. So feel free to message me there. Or if you'd like, you can message me on my email, which is mpryshlak@icloud.com.
Fantastic. So we'll have that on our website along with your episode when it posts. But thank you again. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.